approach that was established in the last class. Back in the denoise session, I can just copy paste the task node into this current denoise paint session we will be working on. So go back to the denoise session here, select the note that has the task requirements, copy that, go back to the denoise paint session, and paste it right here. I have painted this shot in stages so I can take you through my steps methodically, but instead of showing you the completed work, I will start fresh with a new paint node off to the side. So I'm going to click Tab, type in Paint, and I'll hook it up over here. And then I can just move this over to the left. I can even add a dot here if I hold down the Alt option, and it just adds a dot right there. And I'll just situate this over here. So before I start, I also want to make sure that my source fill is set to transparent, which it is. And then I also want to make sure that alpha is selected in the paint tab. So we'll go to the paint node here, and we'll go to the clone tool, and then we'll click A, and you can see that opaque turns on down here. And that means that when I paint, I'll be painting in the alpha as well as RGB. I want an alpha where my painted areas will be so that just those areas can be regrained and composited back over the original plate. And then I will make sure that normal is selected, and it is. I'm not going to use the color or detail in this shot, but we can use them later on in a different class. So let's think about this first part of the task, which is removing this camera from this wingsuit flyer here. It's almost like two tasks because the camera is going to have to be removed over the sky and over the wingsuit flyer's suit. So I'm going to be treating them separately. So why am I treating it like two separate tasks? It's because focusing on two visually different areas takes away the focus to complete each area correctly the first time around. And this also goes along with my typical plan of painting shots from the background up to the foreground. The edges of the suit will need to look correct over the sky, so treating the edge after the sky is painted will be cleaner. So now it's time to talk about the clone brush. Over here on the paint toolbar on the left, the little icon is like two little clones, and the hotkey is C. This tool samples pixels from the same frame, another frame in the same source, or a completely different source. To paint with it, you need to set a clone source offset, and there are different ways to do this. Let's start with the first way. First, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and we'll go to a different frame. All right, I'm going to hold down the Control Command key and just make my cursor a little bit larger. So now you just see one brush in the viewer. So the first way to set an offset is to Shift, click, and drag, and then release it in the viewer. So if I hold down Shift, and I press down, and then I just drag, now you can see I have my offset. If I enable the overlay, which is caps lock, you can see that my image has been moved below according to my offset. So we'll just turn off the caps lock. And now the other way to do it is to press down and click once. So I'm holding down Shift, click once, and then click again. I'm not dragging. So it's two clicks. And then there's a couple of other ways too. And that is to use the hotkeys: Q for translate, W for rotate, and E for scale. So I'm just going to reset my offset here with the reset button here. And now you can see it's 0 again. So let's just try the hotkeys now. So I'm going to press Q. So wherever my cursor is where the pivot's going to be. When I press Q, you can see that I have a little plus icon here. And once I start moving it, the overlay is active, and you can see my source moving below or behind the image. And then if you press W, you have rotate. You can see the little rotate icon, and you can rotate if you want to have finer increments, hold down the Control Command key. And then to get out of the tool, you have to press Q or W again. So whatever tool you're in, to get out of the overlay, press W again, and then you can paint. And then the other one, hotkey is E for scale. So if I click E, you can see I have an icon that will let you scale. This is just sort of free scaling here. And then you can just hold down the Control Command and have it a little bit more refined. And then to get out of that tool again, press E. And then we'll reset again. And the last way to do it is interactive mode, which has on-screen controls. So down here at the bottom of the paint window, click the interactive, and now you see I have an overlay. And you can manipulate the image with all of these different lines. So the big thing to remember here is that while my cursor is white, a little white triangle, then you're manipulating areas. If you come out here outside of the circle, if I have this dark cursor here, then will start painting, but you don't want to do that. So you want to have all your manipulations happen within this area or when you're on the edge for the corner pinning. So you can corner pin images. And I'm just going to reset this and then play with some of the other options. You have shearing. Let's just try that again to really be, there we are. It's kind of harder to see in this view. Let me just zoom out a little bit. You can shear this way, rotate, move things around, and then scale. So this is a good tool to use if you want to make a lot of transformations all at once. And then to get out of this mode again and start painting, just click the interactive button and the onion skin icon will turn off and be disabled. Another way to view the offsets besides onion skin overlay is the align tool. And this is another way you can line things up. And when things become invisible is when they're lined up. Actually, what we can do is try a different frame and then we'll click the caps lock. So that's the offset there. And if we click the align tool instead and we zoom in, I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to line things up. And when it becomes seamless is when they're lined up. So this is a little bit harder to line up because it's sort of an organic object flying through the air and you probably need more transformations than just left, right, up, down. Probably need some rotation, etc. But that's just another option. It's a little easier on the eyes and it's good for certain circumstances. So we'll just disable that again. Okay, so I am going to undo this paint stroke. I'm not going to use it for this shot. I can either just Command Z or I can go into the paint node here in the auto paint window down here, you can see that this is where the paint strokes were. And I can just either click delete or click the trash can here. And so one frame of paint has been changed, rebuild the affected frame and rebuild. Okay, and just one more thing before we really start painting is to take a look at the preferences. So I'm going to open up the paint preferences here by clicking this icon to the right in this little paint tab window, paint preferences. And this just brings up just this section. So we'll just talk about a few things here. So this has the color of the brush outline color and the source outline color. So we'll just get out of this real quick and I'll set a little offset here, hold down shift. And the reason why they use the shift key is because you're shifting the image. So now you can see the green cursor is the source cursor and the pink one is where I'm going to be painting. And let's just enable the overlay here so you can really see that. So if I was going to paint, let's just, instead of having blue sky, we'll do part of the suit. And now you can see I'm painting from where my source cursor is. Go back to the preferences. You can change the color to whatever you want. I like to have different colors. And then you can also have some selections here. So the crosshair cursor, let's turn this on. I have it off right now. So click OK. And now you can see there's the crosshair cursor on the right inside my pink brush. And that will just show you where you're going to be painting. So that's one option there. We'll go back to the preferences again. And then we can also go to this feature here where you can show the offset. Click apply. So now you can see the line in between the source and the offset. Source and the target. So if I make my selection here, my offset, you can see exactly the line in between the brushes. So it's just a personal preference. And then we have one more that I want to talk about, which is hide brush outline while painting. So I'm going to just select that and click apply, click OK. So this is the case where if I have an offset and then I start painting, that the brush outline completely disappears. And sometimes I like to do that when I'm really zooming in on some details. And then I would probably turn off the crosshair cursor. in the and I'll leave the offset on for now. Click apply and OK. So now you see we have all these paint strokes that we don't want to use. We just wanted to demonstrate a few things. So I'm just going to go and delete all of these. You can see my paint strokes. And click trash can and rebuild the frame.
You're watching the free version of Silhouette Essentials. For projects and footage, head to borisfx.com for the premium download.
So let's start painting out the camera over the sky. So first I'm going to make sure that my brush is 100% softness because that's what I prefer. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways that this could be done. And first I'm going to enable the display controls over the viewer so I can change the gain and gamma while I'm painting. So a couple different ways to do this would be you can do an offset from the same frame. So let me go down here and make sure that my offset is reset to the same frame. So now frame 115 is the same here as in the viewer. And I'll just do a little offset here.
Bây giờ thì tôi
So it looks okay, except that there is a little color difference here and there. If I bring down the gamma, you can see here that it's not quite matching on the other side. It's very subtle, but skies are pretty tricky. So I'm just going to Control Z and remove my paint strokes. And another way to do this would go into the color tool and sample the sky that's right next to it. I'm going to hold down the period key where my cursor is, and I'm just going to paint. That's sort of like color block painting. But if I, again, bring down the gamma, you can see that it's not quite matching. So the best plan here would be to use original source. I'm going to Control Z and remove that paint stroke. We'll just reset the viewer. And we'll go back to the clone tool. I'll press C. And now we're going to use original source. So I'm going to use a different frame. And with the movement of the camera here, it looks like I can just use one frame back. If I use the frame forward, then I would be painting more of the subject here, but I want to use the frame before. So let's give that a try. So to do that, I just need to change my frame offset to the previous frame. So that's frame 113, and if I click the caps lock, I have to line it up. So I don't want to use the flyer to line up my source. I want to use something that's in the sky. So I'm going to use the clouds here. So I'm just going to click the arrow keys. If I hold down the shift key and arrows, it moves by increments of 10 pixels. And my source, I want to use something. So I don't want to use the flyer to line up my source. I want to use something that's in the sky. So I'm going to use the clouds here. So I'm just going to click the arrow keys. If I hold down the shift key and arrows, it moves by increments. increments of 10 pixels. And then I'm just visually lining it up. So I'm in the onion skin overlay here. I can also click the align and it looks good. So now you can see I have all this sky here that I can pull through. I'm just going to make my brush a little bit smaller and paint. And I'm going to paint a little bit into the suit because that will let me give this suit edge a clean line when I start painting that part. So now you can see I'm going to go to the next frame. I sort of started in the middle of the shot. So let's just go a few frames further. So when I'm going to the next frame, you can see that this number changes as well because it's relative. If this was unchecked, then this number would not change. So this number changes relative to this frame number. And the offset's pretty close. Might have to make a slight adjustment. And let's see how this looks when I change the gamma in the viewer. All right, so that looks really smooth. I don't see any lines around my paint. And let's try a different section. How about let's go over this area here. This is the terrain. So again, I can just use the frame before. Maybe I'll just take down the gamma a little bit more so you can see the definition here. Clicking the caps lock. Lining up. And I could even choose the align. And it looks pretty good. I'll go to the next frame. And again, here, I could just also use the hotkeys, which is QWE. So if I just think I need translation, that would be Q. And I could just kind of line up my source this way. But sometimes I feel like if I use the arrow keys, it's a little more precise. And use that method. It might seem like it might take a long time, but since there's not a lot of color change from frame to frame, it's actually pretty easy to pull through and fast. If we had a lot of color change from frame to frame, that would be a different story. Okay, so now that I've painted a few frames, I will show you the completed paint for this area. I'm going to reset the viewer here. And I'm just going to disable this paint node, and we'll go over to this paint node here and enable it. And now this is the paint that I did to remove the camera out of the sky. So then when I want to QC my work, I think my paint is done. I'm just going to decrease or up the gain and decrease the gamma. And that makes my viewer really contrasty, the images. And I can just do a final check. So I'm just looking outside this area here. Is there any ghosting of the paint? You want to make sure that you're painting with 100% opacity brush when you're doing this kind of work. Otherwise, you can see remnants of the camera in the sky or the clouds or the terrain. Okay, so this looks good. And we'll just reset these values here. I'm going to zoom out, just press frame. F to frame the sequence in the viewer, and we're just going to play it through. And there's nothing that catches my eye. Okay, so then now the next section we're going to work on is painting out the camera over the wingsuit. So this would be this section here. And it sort of remains almost to the end. You can see a little bit of it to the end of the shot. So we're going to use the paint node over here to the left to do some of that paint as well. And we'll just enable that, click D, and now we can work in this paint node here. So now let's work on removing the camera out of the wingsuit. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm also going to remove the connection line for my clone brush. I'm going to go to the preferences here, and I'm going to disable show offset. Apply. Okay. So when I am scrubbing through and I'm looking at this task, I don't necessarily want to start at the beginning or the very end. I kind of want to start at a place where the camera is really over the suit, in an area where I can probably use the frames. If I clean out the camera, I can use it for as many frames as possible, going forwards and backwards. And then once I paint out certain sections, I'll slowly move towards the head of the shot and to the tail. So I'm going to look here in this section, and I'll probably start painting out an area around here. And then once I clean out the camera here, I can use that as a source going backwards and forwards. So the brushes I'm probably going to use for this task would be the clone tool and the drag brush and probably the dodge. So let's get started. I want to make sure I'm on the same frame, so I need to reset my frame offset. So I'm going to be pulling from the same frame. I don't want to recreate all the frames by hand because the suit doesn't drastically change from one frame to the next, so you need to keep the paint consistent and make subtle adjustments as you go along. Recreating each frame as I go would create popping and chatter, so I'm just trying to avoid that. Okay, so it might not be totally perfect, but it's good to get started. And now I'm going to use this frame to go backwards. So I'm going to back to the clone tool here, and I'm going to make sure that my offset is to the next frame, which is when we painted. To work on the offset, I'm going to click the caps lock, and you can see I'm way off here. I'm first just going to start off with the shift and the arrow keys, nudging the frame into place. If I just press the arrow keys without the shift key, it's 1 pixel. And that looks lined up pretty well. I'm painting at 100%. And we just start pulling through. If it's a little bit off down below because this part of the suit moves differently than this lower part, then I just nudge that into place as well. It's not quite a rotate. And we just keep going. So even the same frame can use different offsets. There's one offset there, and then I'm doing another offset here. And you can see not quite lining up. My paint's starting to move up here. So I'm just going to go back to offset, nudge it down, so it's a little more consistent. And then we'll go a few frames in the other direction. I'm going to change my source to be a frame behind, so that would be frame 77. And line that up. You can see that I'm mostly doing XY offsets here. You could do a little rotation, but I try to avoid rotating as much as possible unless I have to, because it really degrades the image. And you can see here that it's getting a little dark over here. If I use the drag tool and I want to smooth out this area, let's just change the viewer a little bit. A little more extreme. And we'll just zoom in. If I hold down the shift key in the middle mouse, or if you have a Wacom pen, you can, whatever button is programmed to the middle mouse, you can zoom in. Now if I use the drag tool, Shift D, and I'm trying to drag this in, it kind of makes it a little bit darker. So what I really want is the dodge tool. So this is the dodge tool here, and maybe not 100%. I'll just bring it down a little bit. And I'm just going to lighten that up a little bit. It looks a little bit extreme. We go compare the frames before and after. I'm going back to the drag tool to smooth out my dodging. Sometimes the painted areas can get a bit muddy from repeated cloning from frame to frame. Dodging and burning can help with that. They add brightness and darkness as well as definition if they're used more like a paintbrush itself. And we'll zoom out. So it's a little bit uneven here, and then you can go back to bring a little bit more in just at a slight opacity, and so on. So you can make these micro adjustments as you go through, pulling from frame to frame. So I'm going to use this frame as long as possible, but when things really start to change, because the position of the wingsuit is changing and it's rotating. So that's going to be a little more work if I can use this frame for a long time. But then I might actually go to around this frame and paint a clean frame and then bridge my two sections. If I tried to use this frame the whole time going to the beginning, it might not match up, because by the time I get to this section, this might look too different from what it's really supposed to be if I'm using a frame from the middle of the shot. So then we can just try that out. So I painted these frames, and I'm getting towards the beginning of the shot. Let's say I'm going to paint this section here, and then I'm going to bridge it towards this section that's already been painted. Make sure we're in 100% opacity here. And it's some small offsets here. It looks like I'm on the wrong frame. It happens all the time. Reset that by clicking the reset button here. And I'm going to just paint this little section. And plus you can see here now that I also have the camera over a darker part of the suit. And I'm probably going to paint that totally separately, because the white part of the suit is moving differently than this edge part here. And we have lines to think about, like this line here. So it's a lot of different little areas to keep in mind. And then to compare to the original, you can press 2. So that's the input. 1 is the output. And you can see that the viewer mode is changing up here. So 1 is output and 2 is input. So sometimes I'll compare back and forth to make sure that's probably looking like what it's supposed to look like. This is definitely the manual painting part of this task. Okay, so that's a little bit quick. So when I compare back and forth, I have to make a little more adjustments here. Okay, so then we have this frame, and it sort of has to match here. Because then I can take this frame and paint it towards the beginning of the shot, but I want to bridge between here and here. You can see that this technique takes a bit of time, and it's definitely an organic process. Things might look worse before they look better, but one just has to trust in the process. Procedural options such as making lots of little clean patches for the different parts of the suit would not be an impossible approach. but that involves clean plates, tracking, roto, edge fixing, and grading. I think it's faster with manual painting. So you see I have this frame here, and this has to somehow animate to match this frame. So this is where the tricky part comes in. So how do I make that match? So I'm going to take this frame and I'm going to use that as the source to paint this frame. So I'm kind of going in between. It's kind of like the 3, 5, 7. You want to paint frames that skip a frame. You want to start painting every other frame when you start the bridging process. That way, frames in between already painted sections will still resemble both sections on either side, or in either section. One takes a little bit of both sections for the middle frame, and then you go in between after that, and so on. This technique is good for sections that look really different after a certain range. Or you could have larger gaps. Instead of every other frame, you have a couple frames in between, like paint 1, 5, and 9, and then paint 3 and 7, and then those frames in between. The bridging is done for this little section. Although it's a little rough since I painted it out live in this demo, it's a skill and a technique that every paint artist would benefit from learning. It gives order and direction to an otherwise daunting paint animation task.
You're watching the free version of Silhouette Essentials. For projects and footage, head to borisfx.com for the premium download.